Hello to you, I'm Ramjee Chandran and I welcome you to the History of Bangalore. This is episode 49 in season 1, the early to late medieval era, where we have been looking at everything that led up to Kempe Gowda and the creation of the modern city as we know it today. And as we edge one step closer to the end of the season, I will walk you through the last of the Hoysalas, Veera Ballala, to the origins of the Vijayanagara kingdom. But before I do, I would like to acknowledge the support of my sponsors, the Prestige Group, and this podcast becomes possible only with their corporate support. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. So here we are right after the fall of Halebeedu, or Dora Samudra as it was known then. In the last episode, I told you about the siege of Halebeedu and the surrender of Veera Ballala to the Sultanate forces. By this act, the Hoysala kingdom joined the kingdoms of Warangal and Devagiri as the new vassals of the Sultanate, and the last great Hoysala, Veera Ballala III, was never to regain his sovereignty or his supremacy as the overlord of the Deccan. And we find a record of his new lowly status on a rather intriguing inscription found in Chellakere dating back to 1313. It read that Veera Ballala now referred to himself as a Mahamandaleshwara or general rather than as a Maharajadiraja or emperor, clearly acknowledging his new and inferior status. From the time of the fall of Halebeedu in 1311, Ballala was living on borrowed time. He moved from Halebeedu and into Belur, which he made his new capital. And having given away all his stored wealth, which, as we know from the previous episode, was an astonishing, mind-boggling sum, he had also agreed to pay a zimma to the Sultanate. A zimma is an annual tribute, which is in exchange for protection and personal freedoms. To make sure that he would keep his promise, Malik Kafur took Ballala's son Virupaksha hostage and held him in Delhi for 2 years. Now there's a theory that Ballala was taken to Delhi along with Malik Kafur as he returned from his campaign, but there seems to be some debate on that. But nonetheless, when he reached Delhi, by one account, the Sultan accorded him regal recognition. He gave him a robe of honor and a parasol. And some accounts say that Ballala didn't actually go beyond the Sevana kingdom, but two things suggest that he would have visited Alauddin Khilji in Delhi. First, it was the order of the day, and feudatories did visit the overlord. And the other and more intriguing account is the story, and maybe this was all only legend, that Alauddin Khilji's daughter fell in love with Veera Ballala. The account says that she fell in love with him from the stories of his bravery that she had been told. But what about maybe he was in Delhi and she'd actually met him? Well, there was no evidence to suggest that either was a possibility. Anyway, pining for him, she threatened to kill herself if she could not be with him. So Ballala sent his sword in his place, and Khilji's daughter was married to the sword in a formal ceremony. Eventually, she joined him and they lived together for 10 years. And then caste reared its ugly head when Courtier suggested to Ballala that he was a Kshatriya and she was of inferior caste, and they say this led to Ballala rejecting her and sending her away. And that insult, they say, was one of the reasons for the second invasion of 1326 of the Sultanate forces in the Deccan. True or not, who doesn't enjoy a good love story, and that too a tragic one? Now there have been similar tales of Sultanate princesses falling for Deccan kings, and I will visit all that in a later episode. Back to reality. Because Ballala promised to pay the annual tribute or zimma, and because his son, the Prince Virupaksha, was a hostage of the Sultan, Alauddin allowed Ballala to return to his capital, Dora Samudra, and from then on, Ballala would try to regain his footing. Now by 1313, Ballala had positioned himself as an ally of Alauddin, and so pleased was the Sultan that he released Virupaksha and had him accompanied back to Dora Samudra with due deference to his position as prince. The return of the prince, Veera to the capital on the 6th of May 1313 was celebrated. It was marked by rejoicing and ceremony, with Ballala providing his subject with a tax exemption to mark the wonderful occasion. In hindsight, it would seem that Ballala's easy acquiescence was superficial in his strategy to keep the peace temporarily and to comfort the Sultanate from moving away from the kingdom. Well, this may not have been difficult, as the mandate of Malik Kafur from Alauddin Khilji was plunder and not politics, and after Kafur's return to Delhi from the 1311 campaign, there was hardly any military or administrative presence of the Sultanate in the Deccan. In no time at all, Ballala was back to his belligerence. Not one to surrender easily, he regrouped his forces. Clearly, the next on his agenda was to launch counteroffensives against the Sultanate forces in the south. In the absence of a meaningful political presence in the Deccan, things started to come apart for the Sultanate. In Delhi too, there was turmoil, both about news from the Deccan and significant internal troubles that had been brewing in the court of the Sultan. First, in the Deccan, King Ramachandra of the Sevanas or the Yadavas had died, and his son Sangama openly declared his revolt against the Sultan. So Kafur was back on the campaign with his army and marched the 800 kilometers or so towards Devagiri. Sangama took flight, and Kafur annexed the kingdom in the name of the Sultan, but this time around he set up an administration. And this would have been the first administrative presence of the Sultanate in the Deccan. And contrary to the earlier campaigns of loot and destruction, Kafur is said to have set up mature governance. He sent letters to the various districts assuring everyone's safety and peace, and it is said that the people were actually motivated. They worked harder than ever, and the country prospered under this new administration. On the flip side, things were not smooth in the religious sphere. An account of the chronicler Abd al-Malik in his Futu al-Salatin, or Victories of Sultans, says that filled with zeal, Kafur plundered the temples and in some cases replaced them with mosques. By this, Devagiri became a major center for the Sultanate in the Deccan, and this would go on to have a significance in the years following. Now, Devagiri is the older name for Daulatabad, and many of us will recall the major folly of later Sultanate ruler Muhammad bin Tughlaq, who moved his capital from Delhi to Daulatabad and then changed his mind and moved it back to Delhi. Some maintain that this was an act of insanity, and even in modern Tamil slang, the name Tughlaq has come to be used as an insult to describe somebody being foolish. The famous comedian and political activist Cho Ramaswamy published a contrarian magazine which he titled Tughlaq. Not all the Sevana kingdom capitulated to the Sultanate though. There were holdouts in the hard-to-access hilly regions, and much of this history is interesting and deserves to be pursued. Well, the part that is of great importance to us is that when the principal rebel against the Sultanate in the Maratha hills, Malideva, declared himself the king of Maharashtra and tried to consolidate his position, he was set upon and killed by Gangaya Deva of Gutti and, importantly, Mummadi Singaya of Kampili. Mummadi Singaya was a Hoysala general who had declared independence from Ballala in the wave of Kafur's 1311 attack. And it is said that whatever chances now that there were of a unified Deccan resistance against the Sultanate died with Malideva. And the history of the South may have been very different if unity had prevailed. Mummadi Singaya died not long after this, and he was succeeded by his famous son Kampili Raya or Kampila. Now Kampila tried to consolidate the kingdom, and he tried to forge some sort of unity against the Sultanate forces. But Malik Kafur attacked him, occupied Kampili. But before he could get anything significant done, Alauddin Khilji summoned him to Delhi because internal trouble was brewing. All this had a direct impact on the connected histories across the Deccan, including our own, that's the History of Bangalore, and it is good to know these causes and consequences. Meanwhile, in Delhi, things started to come unglued for Alauddin. He had summoned his best general and, they say, lover, Malik Kafur, back to Delhi because there was a lot of trouble in the palace with his own family, but things moved rapidly sideways for them all. Once again, This part of history is interesting, and I would say that it should be pursued separately. But in short, Malik Kafur poisoned Alauddin Khilji and then tried to rule by proxy through the younger prince, Shahibuddin. But this did not stand with some other factions, and Malik Kafur himself was put to death. And after some kerfuffle, the older prince and heir apparent Mubarak was crowned king of the Khaljis. But now things had started to come apart everywhere. The urge for revenge and freedom from Sultanate rule erupted first in Gujarat, where open rebellion had broken out. In Chittor, the Rajputs threw Sultanate officers over the wall and declared independence. In the south, in Devagiri, Harpala Deva, Ramachandra's son-in-law, drove out the Sultanate forces. Warangal stopped paying tribute. Travancore and the Pandyas of Madurai fought for dominance, and they ignored any garrisons that Malik Kafur may have left behind. And now, the entire south was in a state of anarchy. And now for a well-deserved commercial break, and when I come back, let's find out how Veera Ballala fit into this mess. Right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. RERA approved.
So, how did Ballala fit in? In the wake of all this anarchy, Ballala saw an opportunity to reassert his independence from Muslim overlordship and restore his former glory. Now, his first step was reconstruction. The Hoysala kingdom, along with much of southern India, had started to show signs of recovery. Temples were repaired, fresh grants were issued for their upkeep, and literary activity had resumed. By 1300, a flourishing body of poets indicated that society was regaining stability after all these disruptions of war. But in those times, peace was fleeting. In the first couple of decades of the 14th century, Ballala was back to his pugnacious best. For example, the war between the Pandyan brothers, Sundara Pandyan and Veera Pandyan, had been unabated. But instead of letting the battle play out within the Tamil kingdoms, Ballala found the need to interfere. Maybe he did this to gain more territory for himself, but the result, the enmity that developed between him and Veera Pandyan, became legendary. This time is also when the Sultanate under Qutbuddin Mubarak started to flex its muscle. Mubarak had appointed his general Malik Khusru and tasked him with regaining their domination over the Deccan and start to quieten things down in the south. Now, as an aside, Khusru was Mubarak's lover, just as Malik Kafur was Alauddin Khilji's. Historical accounts make specific mention of this relationship between Khusru and Mubarak, which included public displays of affection. It is said that Mubarak Khilji was in love with Khusru to the point of distraction. Now, this is significant because of the window it offers us to look into the social mores of the day, even if fleetingly. The point being that it did not seem like an aberration to the people and the rulers of the day. But later historians blame the sultan's infatuation with their lovers and the resulting carelessness that led to the deaths of both Alauddin and Qutbuddin Mubarak at the hands of their lovers. But another account from the historian of the time, Ziauddin Barani, spoke of society having become hedonistic, and he said that mosques were losing their congregations and people were losing their fear of the monarchy. Anyway, sexual preferences and proclivities aside, Mubarak and Khusru had a problem on their hands, with the provincial kingdoms refusing to honor their new financial commitments. In 1318, Qutbuddin Mubarak marched to Devagiri and killed the Sevana king Haripala. From there, he sent Malik Khusru to Maabar, which is what they call the Pandyan kingdom, where Khusru stayed a full year, and during this time, they also took control of Coorg from the Hoysalas. But soon after these campaigns, Khusru returned to Delhi, and when he was there, he murdered Mubarak and seized the throne, and this was around 1320. and Khusro, or known as Khusro Khan, formerly a Hindu of the Barwad order, a clan from Gujarat, mainly engaged in herding livestock, became the Sultan of Delhi. It was a short-lived tale though. He was Sultan for less than 6 months when he was overthrown by the new dynasty of the Sultanate, Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq. Now Ghiyasuddin lasted only a few years, and in 1325, Muhammad bin Tughlaq came to the throne. And this was new trouble for the Deccan. Now returning to Veera Ballala, while all this was going on in Delhi, Ballala had his hands full. Not only was he involved in the family spat of the Pandyan brothers, but he was also fighting his own local principalities and feudal lords who had started to assert their independence. In 1312, the chief of a clan in the Nilgiri Hills, which is in present-day Tamil Nadu near Ooty, laid siege to a local fort, and he had to be handled. And in 1318, Ballala marched upon that old jewel in the crown of the Hoysalas, Kannur. Now Malik Kafur had occupied that city, but he abandoned it when he had moved to Delhi and left it in a state of chaos, and Ballala saw this as an opportunity. We might remember that Kannur was the capital of Veera Ballala II and Someshwara, and the Hoysalas, even from a standpoint of ego, wanted to keep it, but they kept losing it to various battles. So in 1320, Ballala marched against Kampila, whom we encountered only a little while ago, and he defeated him. A revenge battle did Kampila no good, and Ballala had prevailed. And in the middle of all the epigraphical evidence available about Ballala's doing in the region, I must mention this one. In 1322 AD, Ballala had lunch at Hariharapura. One inscription mentioned that he ate food, visited a dam, and an agricultural channel in the area. And for unfathomable reasons, this event made it to latter-day history books, that the man had a meal. Muhammad bin Tughlaq attacked the south in 1327 AD, but first he had made peace with the Mongols, and these would be the Chagatai Khanate, fragments of the old Mongolian Empire a century after Chinggis Khan. Tughlaq paid them off so he could focus on his southern campaigns. This was a smart move. He may have been mad, but maybe he was just a mad genius. When the attack came from the Tughlaq forces, it seemed that the south could do nothing to stop them. Like a tsunami, Muhammad bin Tughlaq is said to have, and I quote from an inscription, subdued the whole of the Carnatic both in length and breadth, even to the shore of the Sea of Oman. Now, we know the Sea of Oman is the Indian Ocean. The Hoysala capital, Dora Samudra, was a part of the wreckage of Tughlaq's campaign, and you might remember that this is following Ballala's refusal to pay taxes to the Sultanate, and Ballala capitulated soon after this attack. Also in ruins were the last vestiges of sovereign pretense for Ballala. His kingdom was broken, and his ego was broken, but not his resolve. Ballala now saw that he could become the principal power of the south again and speak for all the kingdoms in spirit and in forum, if not in monarchy. And the Tughlaq attack made Ballala come to the realization that a forum and united front is what the south needed if they were to confront the Sultanate. So he set about contacting all the kingdoms and tried to cobble together a coalition of forces from all the small and scattered principalities across the south. Now nothing more was left in the Deccan than these small and scattered principalities. The great kingdoms of the time, the Sevanas, Hoysalas, Pandyas and Warangal, had been left in tatters. So, ceding day-to-day administrative control to a bunch of ministers, which by the way included a woman, Kalavati Chavadiyakka, Ballala focused on creating a confederacy of the south and becoming the leader of a united army. Sadly, nothing material came of this coalition, but it was a time of change. And soon Ballala, who had moved base around from where he was in Belur to Tiruvannamalai to Kanchipuram and other places, found himself with another distraction, the creation of a new city in 1336, a city called Vijayanagara. The city of Vijayanagara came about because of the troubles that Kampila Deva of Kampili had with Muhammad bin Tughlaq. When Tughlaq's forces attacked Kampili, which is near present-day Gulbarga, Kampila knew that all was lost. And as the sad story has it, facing certain defeat, Kampila Deva oversaw the mass suicide of all the women of his palace who preferred death to capture, and then, with his kingdom certainly lost, he rode into battle, knowingly to his death. The victorious General Malik Zada of the Sultanate forces decapitated him, stuffed the head of Kampila, and sent it as a trophy to Delhi. And in the settling dust of this battle was born the new Vijayanagara kingdom. The end of Veera Ballala III came not long after this. Somewhere between late May and mid-August of 1343, Ballala met his last days. And it was a cruel ending. The source of the story is the great traveller and chronicler Ibn Battuta, who was in Madurai on his journey to China, and he heard the story from a relative who claimed to have seen Ballala's remains. It all happened in Kananur, where Ballala had set up camp with an army of 100,000 Hindus and 20,000 Muslim mercenaries. The Sultan of Madurai, Ghiyasuddin, was a former general of Muhammad bin Tughlaq and had declared his independence and set up his capital in Madurai, which was the old Pandyan capital. Veera Ballala, looking to regain some supremacy of the south, attacked Ghiyasuddin's forces. He routed them and laid siege to Kananur. 10 months into the siege, he made the mistake of offering Ghiyasuddin's garrison safe passage if they surrendered the town. Ghiyasuddin asked for a 14-day truce, but secretly he called for help. In this time, Ghiyasuddin managed to gather an army, and many of them were volunteers. They knew that if Kananur fell, Madurai would be next, and they were not so keen to return to the rule of Veera Ballala. A strike force reached Ballala's camp at midday. They slipped in unnoticed when guards were absent. They were mistaken for common thieves, and by this they caught the camp completely off guard. Panic spread, a general rout followed, and Ballala's forces were slaughtered. And then, as Ballala himself was about to be killed, a nephew recognized him, and his life was spared and he was taken prisoner. Sultan Ghiyasuddin, who feigned courtesy, promised his release in exchange for all his wealth, his horses, his elephants. And once again, Ballala gave up everything he owned. But no sooner had he done this, Ghiyasuddin's deception ended, and Ballala was executed. Now, the following story might not pass the test of evidence, but Ibn Battuta said that Veera Ballala's body was flayed, his skin stuffed with straw, and they hung him from a gibbet on the walls of Madurai and left him for the crows. And in the worst irony, Kananur, the lifelong object of Hoysala desire, became the grave to its last king, Veera Ballala III. Right on the heels of this episode is the rise of the Vijayanagara kingdom. Only 3 more episodes to go as we close out season 1 and welcome the builder of modern Bangalore, Kempegowda I. And that is coming soon. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.